Good morning. It has been a crazy night. We just had literally tornado warnings every 30 minutes starting at 2 a.m. until about 7 a.m. this morning. So pretty exhausted. I was hanging out with my backpack on and my shoes and my clothes on with a blanket, ready to go into the deepest space of the house when needed. So ended up jumping in there twice. Luckily, we didn't get any damage that I can see, but now we're having flooding, so it's been crazy. But today I wanted to talk about something that I find another thing that I find troubling when it comes to, I feel Irish people accepting that that we are a tribal people and that we're worth preserving and fighting for. And I've mentioned before some of the different things that come up around historical trauma and ancestral trauma. But one of the biggest things that I think is not really understood or talked about is that there's a silencing that happens with historical trauma. And a perfect example of that is I'm in a group of Vedic astrologers, and we were looking up different charts of different countries, and I was like, oh, let's look at Ireland, and they're like, okay. And they kind of laughed when I said that, Ireland's going through a lot right now. And they thought it was funny. And I noticed that when I bring that up about Ireland and Irish people, and I don't know if it's because the Irish are so loud and proud in the US, and maybe globally, there's this perception that, and I think that's a part of just the Irish mindset of we're okay, we're fine, we're okay, we're just okay, we're making it, we're okay. And so there's this idea that there's a lot of us, right? And there's really not. And I think because we've been so dispersed, because we had to, there's also not a cohesive voice. So people just think of oh, there's the Irish people that are proud of being Irish, but whatever, they're just happy, little leprechauns. And then there's the Irish people in Ireland, that are so friendly and fun and with beautiful music and da 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 da. And so it's not until you start to dissect some of that where you realize our culture is incredibly unique. We've had such a powerful influence on music and poetry and writing and creativity and beauty and spirituality and nature and even in I'm getting chills on this, so it's an important one, even on the undercurrent of just that subconscious wisdom, of these mossy old forests with wizards and robes and magic, and all of that is just born from this ancestral connection that isn't even in the forefront maybe of our awareness. So but what comes about with all of that, with them laughing, right, was this belief that, oh, how can the Irish possibly have any plight? They're the Irish, right? And I think because we were so good at wanting to assimilate and blend in, so just so that we could finally have a chance, and I'm speaking more of and maybe so in Ireland as well, but for sure in the US, You know, that feeling of just like, we just want to get along, you know, we just want to blend in. And even with my own family, there was like this heavy push to speak English correctly, you know? So don't have any sort of accent at all and speak correctly. And, you know, so, and that's, I know that that push was just from like, the better you blend in, the easier life is going to be for you. So what does that do? That feeds into that deep silencing. And that deep silencing, and I'm getting chills on this again, so it's important, you know, for all of you to hear, but that deep silencing is a poison. And it is a poison that festers, and that feeds into that shame that's experienced as a culture and as a society. And it's very interesting because, you know, I was just mentioning this astrology group, like, these are very, what you would consider open-minded people. It's a Vedic astrology group, so it's a mixture of a lot of people from all over the world. This particular person happened to be American, but that runs the group, and he's wonderful. Like, he's a wonderful astrologer, but yet there's still this perception, right? And what I find interesting is that whenever I talk about the tribal aspects and the cultural aspects and the ancestral trauma with Native people, they don't laugh. They get it. They get it. And they get that silencing as well, and that diminished experience of that, you know, it's so big that it's difficult to talk about. So I wrote this down and I thought it would be interesting for you to hear. So there's a particular kind of silencing, and that deep silencing was kind of like the initial stage of that, and it's called narrative silence. And it's the avoidance of speaking of a socially shared experience because it's too difficult for others to comprehend, and then your identity gets defined by that trauma. So it's like the entire culture, it's so difficult to explain what the entire culture has gone through, that they don't talk about it. They don't talk about it in a way that they don't feel like it gets you know, it just gets like, I can't think of my words, discounted. And the other thing that also contributes to is then that feeling of you know, you're only being identified by the trauma. And so then, you know, like, what is this global view, right? It's like immediately people think of the famine, right? The potato famine. And the Irish people are like, okay, that's genocide. Like, it was an act of genocide, right? But that also that gets like discounted. They're like, wow, was it a genocide? Well, yeah, it was, you know? And so there's, so it's like, how do you speak about that? And then you've got generations of that, of like, it's been through too much, you can't talk about it. Blend in, right? Get along, figure out how to get along. And so then that leads to that generational deep silencing. And then what comes from that, right? The bottom line of that deep silencing is loss of culture, loss of identity, loss of connection, loss of community. So it is one of the worst poisons. So one of the biggest ways of healing that energy is to get the breath moving again. And what I mean by the breath moving again is telling the stories, right? So it's so empowering when you see other Irish people out there, whether from Ireland or otherwise, that are sharing the stories, telling the stories, telling the stories of the pain, of the trauma, of the broken families, of the young people lost, of the violence, of the, assimilative, like forced assimilation into things, and the emigration and the diaspora. Like all of that is a part of it. And if we get that energy moving and start telling the stories and encourage each other to tell the stories instead of like pushing each other down, then that strengthens us as a tribe and as a group. And one of the, I would say, second worst poisons of that silencing is the crabs in the bucket mentality. And I see that a lot. I see that a lot in the Native communities, and I see it a lot in our community of, you see someone doing well and that like desire to like pull them down and not even realizing that you're doing that, like saying to someone like, hey, I'm so excited, I'm finally making X amount of money, and a relative is like, well, that's not even that much, or is that a legit job, like that kind of stuff. That's that crab in the bucket mentality of like pulling people down, and it comes from that intense, I think I was talking about it yesterday, that disenfranchised grief, which leads to a shame, which that shame ends up leading to pulling each other down, and all of that is in connection to that deep silencing. So let me know your thoughts on this. I love hearing feedback from all of you. Sometimes I get some comments that I'm like, okay, this is why I'm talking about this stuff. Where there's people that are fully on board of walking into our own self-annihilation, and I'm not on board with that. I think we're a people worth fighting for. I think we're a culture worth fighting for. And I think we're a beautiful people, and there's no shame in that. So yeah, share your thoughts with me. I'd love to hear them. And like and follow.